right.
Finally.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kulturecast. I'm your host, Chris Stachiw, and I'm joined by my two good friends all the way from the world of academia. He's your friend and mine, Dr. David Perlmutter from Texas Tech University.
Thank you. Hello again, Chris.
And all the way from the West Coast, he's the coastal elite of your dreams, your friend and mine, the host of Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf, Richard Hatem.
Well, here's the part where I usually quote a line from the movie, but I don't know what the hell these people are talking about.
I don't speak Ration, folks. On this episode of the Kulturecast, we are talking about a film that has no discernible... Well, it has dialogue, but not dialogue that you would understand because there's no translation for the dialogue. We're talking about 2017's Iceman. So the film is directed and written by Felix Randau. It stars Jürgen Vogel as the titular Iceman. No, not Richard Kuklinski. We're talking about Ötzi, the mummy found in the early 90s in the Ötzi Alps, which I believe is in Switzerland. Or I guess it's the Italian border, more specifically. And he is the oldest known European mummy. And this film is the fictionalized story of his life. I don't know how true or real it is because, again, they're making suppositions and ideas based off of a corpse and the damage to the corpse that has been found in the years since he was found. So it is a revenge film set against the backdrop of the Neolithic period in Europe, and we follow Ötzi as I guess he's not called Ötzi in the film, he's Kelab, and so he is getting revenge on other Neolithic clans who have come in and taken a religious artifact from his clan, killed his wife and family, and his only surviving part of his clan anymore is a young baby, which he has now taken cub. I guess, what is that? The Japanese film with lion and cub, I think is what it's called, or I'm probably misquoting it, but it's wolf and cub, excuse me. And it's, it's a similar story where we have an older man with a baby on his back looking for revenge for the people that killed his clan. And it's a revenge story across the Alps. I don't know what else to say because there's no dialogue. Richard, I'm going to ask you first because Dr. Perlmutter picked the film. What did you think of Iceman from 2017?
In my mind, I keep calling it Ice Wish. It really is a revenge story. Okay. There is a lot to say. I have a lot of feelings, and I don't want to just vomit out all of it. I, would like it to be part of an intelligent conversation because David told me he's a professor and, kids are going to be listening. I don't want to, I got to make it look like I got thought in my head. So I'll start slow and say that the artistic conceit of the movie is not new. In my day, it was called Quest for Fire, but it is interesting. It is obviously 100% imagined story about an incident that, or a series of incidents that may have occurred over 5,000 years ago. And part of the gimmick is that this is a story that we will consume visually. Now, I had the displeasure of going to USC Film School, where an academic gun was placed to my head, and I was told to make 5 short films, no sync sound, meaning a story must be told visually. So that is one of the things this movie is hanging its hat on, if you will. Its ability or not to tell a compelling story completely visually, which means we're leaning hard on visual storytelling. Did it do that? Okay. And in what way? I'm going to say that I was not blown away by this movie. I was not blown away by its ability to live up to the artistic standard it set for itself. And I was not blown away by the story it decided to tell. And we can get into details later.
Dr. Perlmutter, I pose the same question to you, sir.
I'm approaching this movie with a couple of questions, and I think it answered them more successfully than I think Richard is describing for him. Partly, I was fascinated by the original story. A corpse was found in the Alps, and I think it was finally determined that it was in the border of Austria. And literally, this is like the most famous celebrity in the history of Austria. There's a sort of cult of Ötzi in Austria today because he's considered like the first Austrian. I was born about 150, 200 miles away from where this is. And we're going to talk a little bit later about the idea of mountains and verticality in Central European culture. So part of it is the cultural lens, watching this, and then the historical lens. So this body was found. And at first, the people had found it, and then the police thought, oh, this is like a recently dead climber who was lost or something, or even a crime. Like they were talking about, like, this is a true crime case. It is a true crime case, as we'll talk about in a moment, and it is a fascinating true crime case. We actually know quite a lot about this person. In fact, we know more about this person than any human being who ever lived until you start getting into, you said mummy. I mean, was not a purposeful burial, but
right.
This is like somebody who was frozen in the ice. I mean, out of a science fiction story. And
I guess that would be considered a natural mummy as opposed to a
natural
kind of,
mummy. Yeah.
Processional mummy.
Let me just give a couple of details here because I think it sets the tone for what the movie had to work with, right? Because first we've got this mystery, right? Like they discover he's 5,300 years old and incredibly well preserved. His clothing, most of it is well preserved, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. His toolkit. Now, this era is often called sort of a liminal or like between era because you have the very beginnings in Mesopotamia of like agricultural civilization. You definitely have elsewhere agriculture. The people in this area were sort of in between hunting and gathering and agriculture. And it's really important to know these are not some savages out of a 1930s movie. I just want to give you just a quick list, okay? On him was found a bearskin cap, a hide coat, what was probably a cape, goat leggings, sheep loincloth, calfskin belt, pouch tools, a copper axe, shoes. He had a half-finished bow, which is an interesting true crime clue, because he probably had another one that he'd lost, and he was desperately trying to create a new one. And then he had a deer hide quiver, flint dagger, birch bark containers, a backpack frame. That's really interesting. You didn't think people back then had frames for their backpack like modern backpackers today. He had a stone disc, which was probably part of the belt. He had medicinal herbs, which have been shown as like they actually help in like reducing pain and things like that. He had tinder in his belt pouch. He had a full like stones and things for like a different other things. The point was that like this guy had like I think it was about 60 separate items, all of which were made at a very high level of craftspersonship, right? So you think he was part of a community. He didn't make them all by itself. So we've got these clues that he was living in a village. He was integrated into a community. This is a community of people who are fantastically skilled at what they do. And at first they thought, well, he just wandered up there and he died. But the U-boat thing, like he was constructing one, that's interesting. And then an arrowhead. An arrowhead is found in his shoulder that severed an artery that he probably died of bleeding out. I mean, this is the forensic files, 5,300 years BC. And then now there's been some discussion over the years. One of the early reports said that he had the blood of 4 other people on him. That's sort of been debated. I don't think that's for certain, but he was murdered. Somebody killed him for some reason. So I just wanted to set up that this is like the great historical mystery in Central Europe. You can stop somebody on the street in Austria and the Tyrolean northern part of Italy and Switzerland and like, Ötzi, oh yeah, here's my theory of Ötzi. So it is sort of like a famous case in the United States, like, John Benet Ramsey or Maura Murray or something like that somebody has done a movie on. It's that level of interest and excitement.
And I think, to your point, and I think also to Richard's point, I think for me, it gets to what makes this story interesting, because to concoct a narrative, and again, this, I would say, Richard, you probably agree, to concoct a narrative around this. Because this is, I mean, again, there is a murder at the center of this, but I don't know any more than anybody else if this is how it happened or to what extent. And I almost feel like, yes, I appreciate the artistic integrity one is holding oneself to by saying we're going to do it in this language. It's going to be based in the reality of the language. We're going to have the Quest for Fire style removal of dialogue. So it's just the story being told in very broad strokes, because when you have a story like this without dialogue, that's how you have to tell it. And that's the only kinds of stories you could really tell. If you are trying to tell a dialogue heavy story without dialogue, you can't. It's hard. Like this has to be done in broad strokes. I mean, it just has to be.
Well, I wish it'd been done in broader strokes. When first you establish they have language, but now because of the conceit that you've placed upon yourself, it makes no sense to have them use that language when, in fact, if they have language, they would be using it far more than what we saw. There are long stretches of people sitting in silence with each other, which would no more happen with them than it would happen with us.
No, and
because they're not going to subtitle it, they don't want to alienate the audience, and suddenly the trick is revealed and the artifice of the conceit is revealed. If you don't want to have dialogue, that's fine. But I would say, why not strive for displaying a far greater range of human interaction than what we get? How many smiles did you count in this movie? Was there laughter? It implies that not only were these people basically savages, and if we saw a movie today that followed the exact same storyline, we would go, this is the lowest form of what we are as human beings, just murdering for the sake of the last murder, which begets the next murder. I would have been fascinated to see how they were able to convey and illustrate far more subtle and complex human emotions, which I think you can do. And reveal more about an ancient civilization than what we would have just as I watched this movie and I feel like, yep, they're a bunch of murdering jerks. And I'm not sure beyond the fact that they had religion, I don't know how much more I was getting. I really would have loved to come away from this feeling that I knew a range of characters and was also able to discern their characters in opposition to each other in particularized ways, the way you do when you watch a movie, rather than just, well, there's a woman, okay, when she got attacked. Well, there's a child, well, he got murdered. There's some guys, they're killing each other. That seemed to be what I was getting from the movie, and that's a perfectly legitimate way to tell a story about a society in the past. Feels like a lost opportunity.
And I actually, that's the thing, to Dr. Perlmutter's point, like this is such a big case and such a point of importance, I think, especially for understanding that society and having a better understanding of that world. And, Richard, I know you have your own podcast where you talk about, parapsychology and paranormal history and stuff like that. Like, these cases are important. These things are important because we don't get the opportunity, like with what Dr. Perlmutter said, to have all these things on one person at once. Most of the time, something like this is like, we find this thing in the ground, or we find this here, but we're not finding all these things on one person to paint a better, broader picture of who they are. And the movie almost rejects all of that, which is unfortunate.
Well, what's funny is that the background of the case apparently is known to a particular geographical area. And I think a large part of the audience for this movie came in with a lot more information than I came in with, and may have picked up on things based on a general knowledge of the case and hearing about it in the local media, that they were able to glean a lot more. There were more Easter eggs for them that were paying off than there were for me. But hey, it's 2017. Everyone's got access to see this movie. And you're telling a story for a broad audience. And if they wanted, again, you're setting up the game board yourself. So if the game board is, here's what we found, and so our story is now based on these items, sort of an Apollo 13, here's what's on the table. let's see if we can put it together into a narrative, which again may be exactly what they're doing. And for a particularized audience, they may be scoring big. But for me coming to it blind, I didn't have any of that. And so I'm just watching what they're giving me.
Richard, you've raised a really interesting point, which I'd love to have you talk to one of my classes about, is that I watch movies for many different reasons, but I certainly enjoy reading and watching cultural content, sometimes to take me somewhere where I've never been. I probably am not going to go and learn about the lives of people that I can't experience directly, right? So like I appreciate watching, there's a wonderful Indian television series called Panchayat, which is set in an Indian village, a small village. And it's the politics and the personalities and the loves and, the revenge fancies of these people in this Indian village. And it's a fascinating story to me because on the one hand, like they'll speak in, I believe it is Hindi, the language there, but they'll have a lot of Englishisms and they'll talk about somebody studying for their MBA. I mean, obviously it's an international context as well as a local context, but I appreciate that they didn't overly translate everything because they were nervous that Americans were watching and had to explain. They didn't ever stop and say, well, for our American viewers, let me just explain why I'm drinking from a gourd here, in India,
Right.
I mean, and
Right.
I know that's not what you're saying, but I guess I'm more willing for it to be, to lose some of the understanding in sacrifice to the cultural specificity that makes me see another culture. And I just want to add one other example, then I'll stop being a professor and going off on tangents. But so I did grow up not far from there, and we recently went through the Winter Olympics, and you may have noticed that besides the USA, that most of the people who do well in the Winter Olympics are winter countries, right? Like Norway does well, Switzerland. This is the big thing for Switzerland every 4 years, just is to participate and win in the Winter Olympics. There's not a lot. The Swiss, American football team or soccer team does not typically win the FIFA Cup or something like that. So the winter sports are the pride of Switzerland. And like a lot of kids, I was taught to ski. By taught to ski, by the way, meant your parents gave you to a guy who was actually 99% of the time, it was somebody who had been on the Swiss Olympic team. That's what they did after they retired, right? And this guy had actually been on the Swiss Olympic team. And his method of teaching children to ski was take them to the top of what I thought was a mountain. I mean, they thought it was a hill, but I thought it was a mountain, and said, okay, get to the bottom. I will meet you there. And what's funny is I still have in contact with Austrian, South German, Swiss, French Alp friends, and they said that's still the way they teach kids to ski. And there is no bunny slope. There's only the slope with the black flag and the skull and crossbones for children there. So, but this comes from, and Richard, we're going to get all film schooly here, so I'm sorry to if you have any bad memories of that. But like one of the quintessential American things in the world of film is the Western, right? Like when people think of like American film, what is an American film? Oh, a Western, and maybe 20s gangster movies, but the Western, right? Well, in Europe, for us, it was the mountain film. In fact, that's a genre film, the mountain film, whereas Americans thought about conquering horizontally, like, we will conquer the West and go brave dangers in the West, and that proves our manhood. I swear to you that, and again, I've talked to people just recently that and that's still part of the idea of the mountain must be conquered, because the mountain's in your backyard, right? But it's still 20,000 feet, 10,000 feet. It's dangerous. And there's even today, for example, the Edelweiss flower, a beautiful little flower. It only grows at a certain point at the height of the tree line, right? And like, it is still a tradition. You want to get married, you climb to get Edelweiss to give to your beloved to prove you're a man, right?
Wow.
I trust me on this point. I've been told like people like 23 that this is still a thing. Okay. So the conquest of a mountain was the big deal, right? As in like going west and like making it to California in the wagon train was for there. So again, there is that, and you're absolutely right. Maybe it should have been stated somehow. I personally like this film. A word I don't often use, like or dislike, but I think I appreciated this film, and I felt it was more successful. And it could very well be because these twin cultural lenses of the history and then the culture that I was part of when I was a youth, it seemed to resonate more with me. And maybe it didn't succeed in that third part of making that accessible and interesting to people who are outside of that culture. So maybe we're both right, I hope.
Well, it is funny, it does bring me back to film school, and there were so many films, and that was probably one of the most ontologically challenging aspects of film school was getting out of the notion of film is entertainment, because we had to watch movies from other cultures and in other styles where it took a 2-hour lecture. It's like, I can't just show you this movie. That'd be like, again, taking you to the top of the mountain and saying, I'll meet you at the bottom. I'm going to have to explain to you how the Japanese thought about visual storytelling and what their culture was and what Kurosawa was thinking. And we had to pack a bag to go on that journey. And even then, we felt stranded half the time. But at least we had it. And I did become very grateful for those lectures, preparing me for what I was about to see, because then by the end of the semester, I was like, wow. And of course, that was my experience in college, both in literature and in film, was really learning how to meet that artist more than halfway and really bringing so much of myself to every artistic encounter. And I'm sure if I had studied art history, it would have been the same with a painting. That was 40 years ago. And I've spent the last 40 years toiling in this other area, which is not being the recipient, but rather in America being the provider, and the sort of responsibility that I feel about how it is I'm going to engage my audience. And the first thing, and unfortunately, and it's so great that we're sort of coming at it from these two separate angles, because I'm looking at it going, what would my responsibility be if I was making this movie? And again, I sort of get back to that point of, if I'm going to take you to a culture I know you're very unfamiliar with, then the first thing I want to do is see in how many different ways I can catch you catching yourself going, oh my God, they're just like us. I was expecting to really be at sea. And 5 minutes in, that's my uncle, that's my grandma, that's my brother, that's my wife. Human beings are human beings. Which I think is probably a lot of what gets you through that Indian show. Because I think that's always, it's like you go, you see Shakespeare, and the most gratifying performances are the ones that make you go, hey, I know, I must be smarter than I thought. I get Shakespeare because I got every single minute of that 3.5-hour play. But that's because the actors and the director and the props and costume and set design were all designed to make you go, you think you're going to be bored. You think this has nothing to do with you, but it does. Shakespeare we're going to show you tonight. People are people are people. The people that I saw in this movie, I wanted to engage with more. And I wanted to feel more like, oh, fuck, that's me up there. And I would do the same damn thing. And I don't know if I felt that way. And I'm not sure from any character's point of view, because there certainly was not a character going, no, do not pick up the cudgel against your neighbor. It's like Theodoric of York. Wait a second. What if we don't kill each other all the time? Nah.
And that, I think, for me, is the thing that's a little unfair about the movie, is that, to your point, Richard, and to both of your points, I give myself over to a movie willingly pretty much every time I watch it, because I feel like that's what the filmmaker would prefer. And as I've gotten older, I choose to view things up ahead of time about the movie less and less, because I'd like to actually just go into it completely, a la prima, just blind. And so I wanted this to be more than just and again, it's not an issue that it's a revenge. It's just, I wanted it to be more than that in a way, because to your point, Richard, I do actually have an interest in this time in history, and as someone who enjoys history and culture, and especially like cultural history or anthropological history, I would have preferred to have more of a understanding, doesn't need dialogue, of the world and see the world kind of work for a minute before all of a sudden we have people being, raped and murdered. I mean, it's pretty graphic stuff too. That's I appreciate that in a way, because I think the director has made the choice to not stray away or look away from the violence. And the violence of people being hit upside the head with rocks on sticks is not pleasant. It's rather grotesque.
It just looks painful. And that's part of it too. I'm like, oh God, they're outdoors and everything's dirty.
Beating each other to death with rocks. Like, his wife just gets like stabbed in the chest with a giant stick, essentially. Like it's pretty grotesque stuff.
What I would give for a well-appointed hotel lobby with a bar right about now.
That's the thing. If I want to be transported to this world, and again, I'm not aware that this world is not one that if I could, if you could live in any time other than this one, this would not be at the top of my list. This would be like avoid with all choices, anything but this, because it's not somewhere that I would have any interest in participating in the daily life of going and pooping in a bucket effectively and covering it up, a dirt bucket and covering it up with my own hands. Like, I don't like camping that much, so I don't want to live in that world permanently. But again, like there are time and places where I would go back to and live. This is just not one of them. So I kind of wish there was more of that table setting, because they kind of just start mashing the action figures together very quickly. And for me, you kind of lose what I was hoping for, which was to better understand the world that Ötzi lives in and understand why these things are happening. Because to Richard's point, and to your point, Dr. Perlmutter, this is not a world of savages, but they're really portraying it like one. And I think that kind of takes the piss out of the movie, because they're not savages and they're really not giving them the opportunity to show us that. They're pretty much cutting them off at the kneecaps immediately.
Okay, well, let's talk about that for a second, because I want to understand this. Much of what we're not seeing is a village attack another village and take the women, or take the cattle.
Can I interject here a second, Richard? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just on the point that Chris made and both of you made, I would rank the unsuccessful part of this film that related back to the reason why I brought up this incredible richness of the material goods that were found with Ötzi, right? Like greater than technically than King Tut's tomb. This is the King Tut's tomb of the Neolithic. There have been burials with like a horse and like golden armor and things like that. But the stuff that was found suggested this incredibly civilized, rich material culture. And absolutely, and this is something I'd love to get to, the film didn't take its time at the very beginning. If I were the interfering studio head, my notes would be, let's get to know these people. Let's understand them a little bit. You can take 10 minutes, you can take 5 minutes and show somebody making an axe and somebody making their cape or something like that. So let's understand that these are not just people wandering around naked and dirty, killing each other all day long. Because I feel like there was a missing prelude to the exponential violence, right? And the revenge fantasy. And I want to just reference one of my favorite film texts, which I don't know whether it was ever offered in film school. I certainly recommend it to my students. Chuck Jones, the master of the Looney Tunes, the Warner Brothers cartoons, right, was one of the great directors and producers and artists of those cartoons. I owe a lot to him. He wrote a beautiful artistic autobiography called Chuck Amuck about his creative process. And he makes this really great point about how, they were so limited, like they had to be exactly 6 minutes long and there were 7,000 topics they couldn't cover, but that helped the art, to be so limited. But he makes this other point, which I've always shared with my students. He said, Bugs Bunny is the American hero. He's just sitting there in his hole, minding his own business. When somebody comes along, a hunter, somebody comes along and pokes him or tries to take his home or tries to kill him. And so Bugs Bunny looks at that person and says, of course you realize this means war. And then Bugs Bunny gets revenge. But he said that was the American story. And they repeated it over and over again. And that was Pearl Harbor. The idea that we were sitting there minding our own business when an enemy comes and provokes us. And okay, we're going to teach you, right? And so I thought it interesting that this Central European movie did use that. But there was one implication of culture there. These people are not portrayed as like warriors preparing for war. They don't sit around, shaking their spears up and down like some 1930s movie, about Africa or South America. But there should have been more establishing their culture and learning more about them. And I do feel that was missing. It would have helped somewhat place these people in time and space. Please go ahead.
It would have, I was going to say, when it was revealed that the object of this massacre was a sacred object or an object of symbolic value, it wasn't something that we immediately understood as, oh, well, of course, that's a weapon or that's money or that's, a skin that can be used because winter is coming. It is a thing used in a religious ceremony. So that was interesting, and that implied a particular kind of culture. But
people can't see this, but Richard just held up a sacred object.
The sacred object of his household.
He worships it. Yes. We had this discussion about these sacred gods before.
Yeah. They peer into our spaces from lower places, but they are the gods they walk amongst us.
To me, again, the unfortunate thing was to not reveal little bits of recognizable humanity in the vast number of characters that we see, that go beyond the more basic sort of like, I see you, there's a threat. Is there a threat? Is there not a threat? Friend, foe. That to me would have given everything that happens in the movie, more immediate weight. It would have drawn me in as a human being, because again, it would have been that moment of me going, oh, before walking into the theater, I would have expected I was just going to see a lot of monosyllabic savages, going about rather basic functions. We must eat, we must have sex, we must give birth, we must bury our dead, and then we must get revenge when the important thing is stolen. And I found that, again, I found that disappointing, because my prejudices were reaffirmed. People in the past weren't as human as we are now. There was no humor. There was no complexity of emotion. There was just, Kronk and Donk, almost like in a cartoon strip, holding clubs and bashing each other over the head. And it felt like it did a disservice to me and the characters in the film.
Confused unga bunga noises being made. I mean, it is, Dr. Perlmutter sent me that meme, confused unga bunga. Like it's unfortunate, because there's so much more to this than that. And there's so much more going on here. And there is it's almost in a way also like trying to be a Western, because, again, it has Franco Nero in it, who, again, when I think of Westerns, especially Westerns of a certain variety from a certain country, cough, cough, Italy, cough, cough, I think of Franco Nero. And so I know that this is also trying to be a Western, and I get that that's the revenge part of it, but I guess this is such a more interesting, complex story that could have been told here. And I feel like they just wanted it so badly. They forced the story of the Iceman into this, as opposed to the other way around.
It is filmed in a beautiful setting, but that's not the same thing as visual storytelling. And they have a lot at their disposal. And I may not be the brightest bulb, but I had trouble distinguishing characters from each other. That's casting, that's costume, that's makeup, that's hair. I had trouble even locking in on the main character visually. I think you can watch Kurosawa's Ran with the sound off, and because of composition, understand when a scene is one of conflict or not. I think you can watch Raiders of the Lost Ark with the sound off and be able to follow the story simply because of visual construction. I'm not sure I saw a lot of that. I saw action being covered, but I'm not sure I saw it being covered in a way where the actual composition within the frame was helping me understand another level of complexity or just illuminating what was actually happening. I think they were depending on the beauty of the background to bowl us over, and the beauty of the background did bowl me over. But I think there was a way for me as a viewer, and again, because we're coming at something that is essentially a silent movie. I mean, you can watch Murnau and get more of a story and more emotionally involved. And I mean, again, I don't want to keep comparing it to Death Wish, but it was kind of Death Wish when the dust settles.
Yeah, there's two points here. One is both of you have said something it's true in the movie. It's not true in history, and it is a failure of the movie not to give you the correct impression. If you read a lot of the anthropological literature about tribal existence, pre what we call, agricultural urban civilizations, you almost wonder, like, why did we give that up, right? Like, a lot of anthropologists have talked about, like, that tribal peoples, living in natural areas. Of course, there's very few areas that are unaffected by, like, giant civilizations encroaching on them, but they live a pretty good life. They have their stress. They fish, they hunt. They gather nuts and berries. I mean, they actually are pretty healthy. They have no sugars. There's the wonderful book by Jared Diamond, The World Before Yesterday, and he actually makes a list of all these horrible things that our civilization. I'm seeing the cat god again.
This is the most I've ever seen your cat mess with you on a recording, Richard, in 10 years of knowing you. This is insanity.
I'm so
Richard,
sorry.
Because he knows Monkey knows that I'm here, Richard. He knows that I'm here. You should tell David. Tell David. I can cut around this part. Tell David about what I'm talking about.
When Chris visited our house almost 2 years ago, he started calling our cat Fang. I'm like, why are you calling him Fang? He's like, look at him. And for the first time, I really looked at my cat's face, and I could see his, like, teeth kind of sticking down over his mouth like a saber-toothed tiger. Oh. I'm like, is that okay? We took him to the vet. It was not okay.
Oh my gosh.
The cat had all these teeth that had to be removed. And the veterinarian said, this is not your fault. This is the genetic. Certain cats are just born and their teeth are bad, but she's like, look, and she shows, and his teeth were like black. And she's like, it happened to my cat too, and I'm a veterinarian. It's not your fault. Some cats are just, this is how they come out. So we're going to pull a lot of these teeth so that it doesn't turn into a problem. So anyway, yeah. So Chris was essential in saving the life of this cat. And now this cat is trying to demonstrate to Chris,
as long as being a talented artist and a great person, you are a savior. Like, you've saved the cat god. I mean, really,
save the cat.
This is buying you a play. I mean, honestly, Monkey, is it Monkey the official name of the cat? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Monkey is trying to remind us about ancient Egypt and how we should be talking about cat worshipping civilization as the only legitimate civilization. But certainly my cats bring this up at least once a day, but that'll be a separate show, right? We can do one on Cleopatra or something like that and bring up cats there. But
I'm in.
Yeah, I'll pause and then just so.
Pause. You'll pause.
I'll pause.
Yeah. Pause. Oh God! If we're gonna get into purgent and perfect and like a cat punch or something, then the show. So, in fact, I was telling Chris I wanted to do that movie Flow. That I thought was beautiful.
Which is one with no. I don't know if you've heard of it, Richard, but it's yet another film with no dialogue. But that's because it's cats.
Yeah. So.
Oh.
Yeah, it won the Academy Award for Best Animated Film a couple of years ago. It's like a Lithuanian film. It has a cat. It just follows a cat after some sort of catastrophic apocalyptic event in what might be Atlantis. Does that get you interested in
Catastrophic doesn't have to be
Catastrophic.
Yeah, catastrophic.
That's all I heard. Yeah, okay.
Cat-
All right, yeah, I'm still in.
I feel like one of the Batman excellent. Let's get to it. Anyway, let me get back to on screen train here. So we have a lot of evidence that their lives were not nasty, brutish, and necessarily short. If you got past childhood and giving birth, which were the big killers of people before modern medicine, and thank God for modern medicine, right? But if you got past that, people could live very good lives, and they didn't have sugar, refined sugar, they didn't have wars. I mean, they had violence. There is evidence of violence, like Ötzi, but they weren't savage by the old term, which no anthropologist uses today, savage. So the movie didn't get to that. Like, they didn't establish that. And then the other part that both of you said, which it's my personal pet peeve, and this is something like, I'm an older person and I watch television, and there's a movie or a TV show, and there's 4 characters who all look alike, speak alike, you have the same accent. And I'm going like, an old Hollywood producer would go, no, there's got to be a large guy and a thin girl and a tall guy. You can't, like the Scooby-Doo
How
gang,
Norman
right?
Lear of you, David.
Yeah, you can't have, everybody is from California and 24 and all, sound like with the same haircut. So they did make a mistake here. First of all, these people cleaned themselves. These people were, I don't think they were filthy, because I think, first of all, that was, would lead to death. They had medicine. I mean, again, he was found with a medicinal pouch.
I would have loved to seen some of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Some Rambo,
Right,
some First Blood where he's like using the poultice on a wound or something. That'd be amazing.
Yeah. I mean, we have so much evidence that these people cared for each other. We find people who, they amputated limbs, and people lived for years afterwards. Okay, that's pretty good with your copper axe, right? And that means also people in the community cared about you and loved you and, would help you out there. So that the movie, I think, missed in that direction. Absolutely. You're both right.
And how surprising and interesting would that be? Because the way I'm reacting to what you're saying right now would be great to feel during the movie, to go, wait a second, could they really do that? I mean, people talk about doing amputations during the Civil War, and I barely believe it. And now you're going back 5,000 years, but I think that's always the fun part, is realizing, no, they had stuff, they knew things, they understood, that's always going to be the most interesting revelation, is that they weren't that different. They had a lot of time and a lot of generations to figure out which plants helped and which ones didn't, and they were not without resources.
And a lot of that knowledge is lost now. I mean, we talk about, the Library of Alexandria burning and, like all of the lost knowledge there, but the lost knowledge from being without technology, in the terms of the technology we have now to live off of the land or use medicine in its raw herbal or like truly medicinal form, is not something that is understood now the way it used to be. And that knowledge is lost because that's not something we rely on. But at the same time, these people relied on it because they didn't have the opportunities that we do now. But that doesn't diminish, like you just said, what that was at the time for them comparative to us. That's a technological marvel and breakthrough that other civilizations may not have been able to have at the time, and others weren't. And I think it's interesting because this movie I don't think it ignores it per se. I just don't think in a lot of ways this movie is concerning itself with telling a story about the Iceman, which is fine. I guess I don't really have an issue with it just taking the Ötzi story and turning it into a Western revenge story where we have a guy pursuing another guy across the insert landscape here and what have you. I have no problem with that. In theory, it's just the trappings of this time around, for me, they're enough to carry it to the end because it's not 2 hours. Though I would say for myself, I almost would have preferred it be 2 hours because that would have allowed there to be a little bit more building of the world that this film needs to build. Because, I think about other movies like this one, right? The one that comes to mind that came out, only 5 years later, that I would actually say people would be better off watching if you want to see something that takes the gimmick of this 90% of the way there. It doesn't do the shot in the original language kind of conceit, which, at the time, the director thought about doing it and he ended up not. The Northman from 2022, the Robert Eggers film. It's very similar to this movie. It is a revenge film. That film is more psychedelic because it leans into the Norse mythology of it all. This doesn't really lean into that. I think that would have been interesting if this had leaned into a little bit of the kind of what are the cultural trappings of these people and how is that part of this? And we get the idea that, again, this is religiously kind of the religious icon is why this is happening. So there must be some importance. We just never understand what the importance is. The Northman, I think, does what this movie does better, and because it's allowing there to be dialogue, we get a better understanding of who the characters are, as opposed to just, these are the broad strokes here. And look, if the gimmick had worked better, I don't think I'd be saying some of these things, but the gimmick doesn't work very well because you kind of ignore what makes this story so interesting, which is it's not just a bunch of Neanderthals banging one another over the head with a stick. If that's what this was, I would have no interest in any of this, Frank.
Chris, while you were talking, the sound of your voice provided me some time to think about something else. And what I thought of was, because I keep going back to the sort of the revenge movies of the 70s, you could go back to any era, but it's like, what's novel about a movie like Death Wish or Dirty Harry is this notion of, you can't do that in this society. We have laws. We have evolved to a place where we live in a sophisticated society of laws and human rights. And what you're doing, Charles Bronson, and what you're doing, Dirty Harry, is applying a different, more primitive law that we all feel we have moved beyond. And it's disturbing to us because we all feel those impulses still, but we don't act on them anymore, but you're acting on them. And that's what is compelling about those movies, is that, this is interesting. There's two different moral codes going here. And one is ancient and one is what we think about ourselves as being very sophisticated. And I think it is the inverse argument is what I'm making, is that I want the novelty of this movie to be, even back then they had a more sophisticated way that is now surprising to me, thinking they had a very primitive way of approaching justice or morality. But no, it was just as sophisticated, and moral decisions had to be made when these people went about seeking revenge, and not everyone agreed. It felt like in this society, everyone kind of knows what's going down. It's like, yeah, kill or be killed. We're gonna burn down your village, and we can pretty much count on you coming back to burn down my village. And then the coup de grace, of course, at the end is revenge has the final word.
Yeah, and it is a disservice to those societies. Now we are always at a disadvantage when there's a people that only have material remains and we don't have any writing. And of course, that describes most human societies from millions of years ago, our ancestors through today. I mean, there are entire civilizations where the writing, the Indus River Valley civilization, where they had this magnificent civilization, we can't read their writing. We can't understand that. We can only infer from the material culture, which was very, very, very sophisticated. We don't know whether they had law codes, right? We do know that when people settled down in agricultural, urban-based civilizations, one of the first things they did was create law codes. And those law codes, like, for example, the Ten Commandments or the codes of Hammurabi, Nimrod, other ones, those seem somewhat bloodthirsty to us through the lens of 2026. But for the time, it was an attempt to limit violence and to say, only the state had control over violence. And if you commit violence, the state will step in. It won't be one-on-one vendetta there. So that in some ways the film is talking about that this is a city, I mean, a culture that doesn't have these written down, but we don't know whether they might. Like, we don't know whether there was an agreement. First of all, the other thing this thing does sort of gets wrong is that in the archaeological evidence, these people were not isolated. You find these incredible examples of, like, they were using a metal that was dug up 1,000 miles away. There were trade networks all over Europe and the Mediterranean. So people were going to Spain. They were what is today Spain. They were going to what is today Denmark, and traders were coming back. So in some ways, this is like a 1940s view of pre-urban civilization. Again, with the village and people just being. I think I can't get over what you have said before, because it really struck me more I was thinking about it, especially the second time I saw it, is like they could have been cleaned up, they could have trimmed their hair, and they still would have been authentic, right? The idea that, like, people back then were all dirty is a sort of 40s notion, not so keeping up with anthropology.
So yeah. And the one sort of metaphorical object in the film was this box that for a long time we don't know what's in it. I mean, it's the Lost Ark. It's the suitcase from Pulp Fiction. It's like, what is Repo so Man. Important? Yeah. What? Oh, Repo Man.
Yeah.
This is a prequel to Repo Man. I'm amazed you're so-called film buffs. You didn't notice that right away. It's sort of sad.
I know. It's God. Yeah, I think we have now tied it all together.
Remember how at the end of this movie where Bruce Willis showed up and it turned out it was actually in the universe that Unbreakable took place in? That was so strange.
What's interesting is that once you saw what was in the box, it was a reflective surface. It was something that was mirrored that could only be seen. I mean, when you're watching movies and, when your head's been beaten in by your film professors, it's like, oh, reflection, looking at one's self and considering what you see there and why is this the holy thing, the thing that shows us an image of ourselves, and what do we learn when we truly see ourselves. So that was interesting. And I'm sure if I had to write a paper, that's one direction I would have to run toward. What's interesting is that this holy object was then discarded. And maybe like the Lost Ark, it was just like too dangerous to be in circulation. It's got to be. And so he discards it. There's the again, it's Theodoric of York. There's an opportunity to truly reflect upon oneself. And do you embrace that or do you reject it? And what does that lead to? What is the next significant event in the film after self-reflection is disregarded?
Violence.
Yeah. The cycle of violence continues.
Right. Which to me feels
black.
Like, I know, it feels like it's such a bummer for me. Like that's all you wanted to say. It was like, man is terrible. Like, you have this opportunity to tell effectively the only story that anyone's ever going to tell about this character, this real person, in any like interesting, bigger budget capacity, and your takeaway is, well, human beings are terrible. Wah wah. Like, come on. See, it's like those magazines that are at the checkout saying, like, see, they're just like us. Like, yeah, we know. No kidding. We came from them. Unless you don't believe that. But wow. The Iceman, I think for me is a character who in the movie, he's at times the most interesting thing and the least interesting thing, because I don't think they really ever even let us understand who he is as a character, because that's not the point of this movie. And that should have been the point of this movie, is for us to understand who and what and why he is, not how did he die? This is effectively an hour-long gag, like an hour-long punchline to get to the end. This is how he died.
You go back to high school freshman English, and the first thing they tell you is, for a character to be a character in a drama, they change. And I used to think that meant they change 180 degrees. They've all got to be Ebenezer Scrooge. They start out mean, they end up nice. That's what I thought it meant. But what it really means is just the events in the drama have an impact on the players, one way or another. And and I don't know. I mean, I'm curious. I'm not sure where our guy Iceman where
That's
what
all right.
you know what did he learn? How did he change? What these events, which are fictionalized, so this is not a documentary, so this was a constructed narrative. We have to then go, okay, so a writer said, I'm going to tell you a tale. And so the Aesop's fable moral of the story is don't be reflective, or religion sucks. Or how did he change? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, he definitely died and was frozen. That's for sure. He changed from
He changed
like a
from living
semi-solid
guy to a dead Iceman.
Yeah, he changed from semi-solid to solid, more or less. Once was man, now is ice man. And scene. Thank you very much. I don't know. What about you, Dr. Perlmutter? He of academia with a much, hopefully, more serious answer than mine.
No, I have appreciated very much this dialogue, and I don't disagree with anything. I guess I like a lot of teachers, I like to give points for what is done well as making it a case that this was unsuccessful. Again, I don't like to
thank
use words
God.
bad,
I wish you were my
good.
teacher.
I know, same.
Wish you had taught all my courses.
Well, it sounds like you actually had pretty inspirational teachers in many ways. But let's go back to Akira Kurosawa, who also happens to be my favorite filmmaker. And indeed, if I could use a professor word that ChatGPT has stolen from me, along with delving. I think I make poor J.R.R. Tolkien. He loved the word delve, and now AI has stolen that. You can't use delve anymore, or M dashes. My writing has been full of M. I'm going off now. Sorry. I want to go back. To 5,300 years ago, when a man could use an M dash proudly without having to be accused of
throwing it into the
cheating.
GPT. Yeah. He's communing with the AI gods.
Let's talk about Kurosawa.
Was a god of filmmaking, and one of his many masterful traits was, I think of like his film noir, like High and Low, and you think of Seven Samurai. It's sort of astonishing, by the way, that the same person made both movies, right? And you could have no subtitles. Like, oh my gosh, the subtitles are broken. And you would still basically understand a story. But then also what you said, Richard, the common humanity, right? There's so many beautiful moments in Seven Samurai. It's about samurai in medieval Japan, who all three of us probably have no connection to culturally or spiritually, or in our genetic line, but each of them becomes a finely etched portrait of a human being that we probably have recognized in our life, or maybe we aspire to be or see a little bit of ourselves in them. And so by the end, when they're facing the final climax of this hurtlingly fantastic plot line, we are cheering them on as if we were one of the villagers there hoping for their victory and success, right? And High and Low, I want to just mention High and Low in a minute. It's again, I don't know how many people have seen the movie, but like a rich man's chauffeur's son is kidnapped instead of his son. Okay, I just said the basic plot. And this rich man is set up to be, at the beginning of he's a rich guy. He's living in a big house. While this is post-war Japan, a lot of people are poor. He's going to be a jerk, and that's going to be the storyline, that like he's going to be the jerk and his poor chauffeur's son is stolen. He's not going to care about it. And then he does all these really good, kind-hearted things. And there's a moment where the police officers are going, wow, that's a wonderful, good man. We are going to work so hard to solve this case, even if we were going to before, but like we care, right? And you see this, again, this common moment of humanity. These are Japanese police officers in the 1950s. Again, something not connected. I wrote a book about being a police officer in the media, so I have some connection there. But this movie did establish a couple of times. Well, let me mention one scene I think that they did, which I appreciated, was at the very beginning, a woman is giving birth. And we mentioned that one of the reasons you read like, oh yeah, people back then, they didn't live past age 30. They did, but the death rate for children and for giving birth was astronomical. And all you have to do is go to graveyards that go back to like the 1700s, and you can see 9 children, under the age of 5, or 3 wives under the age of 22, because the death rate was so high. And they do show the women coming together to help, and there's some tools they're using, and there's a method and things like that. So I wanted more of that common humanity. And so I think you both have diagnosed in the studio notes what this film should have tried to do is focus on the commonality a little bit more.
And it's a shame that it doesn't, because there's not going to be another movie like this about this particular character case, however you want to view it. There will be something, and there are other things, because I watched one this afternoon after watching the film yesterday about this case, just to understand the actual real life pieces of information surrounding it, and then the conjecture surrounding how his death may have come about, depending on cultural things at the time, what have you, anthropological evidence, which again, it felt more informative than this movie, and I did not expect the film to feel informative. But at the same time, I also didn't expect the film to not honor the fact that it's taking place 5,300 years ago. It's like you can't get ahead of some of that. If all you want to do is tell a story that's essentially lone wolf and cub, but in the Ötzi Alps, fine, but then have some dialogue or have something more interesting to say or do, because even Lone Wolf and Cub does more than this. And it's a shame, because there's a lot to like about this movie. It's well shot. It looks interesting. Again, you don't get to see this kind of conceit done very often. It's still done well enough that it doesn't feel like a complete gimmick and a waste of time, which is also, I think, a testament to this movie, that it doesn't feel completely beyond reproach. It just doesn't get to where it should have gotten. And I think the promise and the premise were too high, and the movie doesn't live up to it. And that's unfortunate, because, not everybody is backing up a truck to make this kind of movie. And so when you see a movie like this, you're like, oh man, still better than it could have been. But I think Ötzi deserved better. Ötzi.
I'm fascinated, and I'd love to get to professionals' opinion on the decision to use subtitles or not in other kinds of contexts where the most of the movie might be in English, but there's people who are speaking another language at some point. And one of the approaches I take to this is I remember some of the World War II movies of the 50s and 60s, maybe 70s too, where occasionally they would cut away to some German officers, right? And the German officers are looking at the map, and there's no subtitles. But the German officers are looking at the map, and you hear Normandy and the Amerikaner and, Invasion. And so somebody made a decision that we don't need to translate exactly. We don't need to say, look, it seems like the Americans are attacking at Normandy. They just felt it would be overkill, and the audience could figure it out. And I sort of like that. I saw a film, which I didn't like at all, called Hunter Killer. It was about a submarine movie, and they had the thing that always bothers me the most is they had Russians in a Russian submarine, and I think they spoke Russian for the first 10 seconds, and then they were translated into English. And I thought, God, have the confidence for Russians to speak Russian, right? Don't be feeling the American audience desperately needs to hear Russians speaking wildly variations of English.
That's so funny you bring that up, because that was the convention used in The Hunt for Red October. Sean Connery's character, the Russian submarine commander, was speaking Russian, and at a certain point, and it's I forget exactly when it was or what the emotional intent was, but it's like when we're finally sort of getting to the heart of his character, and it's early in the film, he begins speaking English, and you almost don't notice that this line now has been crossed. But it's that same convention. It
worked then.
Yeah, it's like
that's my question to you.
European people all speak with British accents, no matter where they are.
Well, okay. So
Italian characters speak with Italian accents in Italy.
Chernobyl was one of the great television shows of all time, in my humble opinion, on there. And I heard the Chernobyl podcast, and the showmaker of Chernobyl talked about that they originally thought, okay, well, it's set in Russia. We're going to have people with Russia. We can't have it be in Russian with subtitles for an entire television series. It just wouldn't work for American audiences or any audiences outside of Russia. But instead, we're going to have Russian accents, and they found it didn't work. It sounded like Boris bad enough. It did, like, people were laughing, and so they switched. But they wanted consistency, so they got mostly English, Irish, Scottish actors and a Skarsgård. You got to toss in a Skarsgård.
And a Skarsgård in a pear tree.
Yeah, that's right. And it worked beautiful, just like it worked like 50 years before in the I, Claudius TV series where, we can't have 50 people with Italian accents. They're all going to be British, and the high-class Romans will speak upper-class British, and the low-class Romans will speak Cockney. It works. It can work, right?
Right.
But here's my question to you is, would there be a situation in a film you were making where you would feel confident in not translating what somebody was saying in another language? And what would that be? Or maybe you have faced that situation. I mean, the Mothman didn't speak English, right?
No, he's not multilingual at all.
Keelese, I think. Is that what it was?
Yeah. Well, if we're stepping aside from any sort of, commercial studio, because that's always part of it is, it's like, look, if we're distributing this film and we know where we're exhibiting it, it has to be something that people can get without working too hard. So that's okay. But setting that aside, my answer would be, if the drama is distinct enough, then for a portion of time, you can have someone speaking a language the predominant audience does not understand, because it won't matter. They'll understand the intent. If in The Godfather, during moments of great violence or great romance, sexual
the Italian
passion,
restaurant scene would have been ruined if they had, subtitles.
Right.
Yeah.
I think when you're dealing with certain emotions that are so human and shared, which is, again, acting out in sudden violence or acting on sexual or romantic passion, we get it, and hearing people speak words that back up those feelings can just be really almost a sound effect music. It's like the whatever that sound of saying that word is as someone attacks someone else, and that just becomes part of the emotion of the act. Or the more crooning love sounds we make, that becomes a sound effect. So those are the situations. But when you're trying to get across plot information that may be lost but must be understood for the story to succeed, you have to subtitle it. Whatever you have to do to get the audience and to keep them on board and in thrall and moving on to the next thing, that's what you do. And what you probably end up doing is solve those problems on the page. You don't write scenes that take up where tons of information has to be conveyed, because you don't want to do that anyway. So you really have to, you have saddled yourself with a challenge. Now meet that challenge, or don't saddle yourself with it, because these challenges are self-imposed.
And that's where I come in with this. Like the choice in this movie to do this way was a self-imposed challenge. It was a self-imposed choice. And I don't disagree with it. I think, Robert Eggers, to go back to my example with The Northman, Robert Eggers almost filmed that film like this one, where it was all in the traditional language and there was no subtitles. And I think that could have worked. And I think it could have worked there because, similarly to this movie, it's a very broad film with a lot of broad themes that are about revenge. And, it's pretty much just Hamlet, but, whatever. I mean, you get the idea. Like, it doesn't necessarily need the dialogue to be understood to get where the filmmaker is going with it. But Eggers decided to not do that, which, as someone who watches and enjoys his films, because he really takes, like we've talked about with other people, a laser-like focus to make something that keeps to the gimmick, that sells the bit. If you're gonna do the bit, you got to sell the bit. You got to commit to the bit. And Eggers doesn't with the dialogue in that film. He films it where where like you just mentioned, Richard, and Dr. Perlmutter, we have people speaking in English accents or doing like, some sort of Norwegian, something of the northern countries in Europe, northern European country dialect, like kind of those accents. And it works well enough, but Iceman just doesn't get there. And that's because I just don't think it's not worrying itself really with there being any dialogue, because the story that it wants to tell is just a revenge story. I think that it's the Iceman character because that's an easy thing for people in Europe to understand. And that's an expectation, like Dr. Perlmutter mentioned, with these mountain movies as opposed to Westerns. Well, we have a mountain movie being made by a German director. Okay, that checks a lot of boxes for certain people in Europe. This is a film not made for an American audience in a lot of ways. We are three Americans enjoying a film made for European audiences who are expecting a certain kind of film. Because like Dr. Perlmutter said, if you watch a mountain movie made by a European director about a European thing, there might be certain expectations that we do not understand. Well, and maybe we're just not privy to it, but I can't imagine that my issues don't stem from that with this movie.
Well, another thing that movies like this often do, and you'd probably want to go back further in human history to a point where the language is extremely primitive and basic, but you can very quickly teach the audience words. And this movie does that a little bit. There are certain words that we began to recognize are words associated with a person who has just died, or and sort of a benediction. Certain words that are used at the beginning that I thought I recognized coming back, at moments of like, okay, I'm sort of putting my hand to your face and then releasing your soul up into the heavens. And you can do that. And they could have made a bigger point of the box, it's like, we're, Tutanka, 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 we could have locked in, and there is a way to do that too. And that engages an audience, and, never a mistake to help the audience feel smart and get involved and go, oh, they said that word again. And that's the word that means the thing. Okay. They could have done that. And they kind of halfway did that.
I was thinking on your list of when to do it, another situation, and for the life of me, I'm trying to think of an example, is when the main character is suddenly immersed among people who are speaking a language the main character does not know, then it would be good not to translate to mimic the confusion of the main character. I mean, you're kidnapped by Romanian hitmen. You want your main character not to understand what they're saying. It's more threatening, right? So I wonder, time travel going back to 5300, then you wouldn't translate until they weren't. I guess the film that did this, and I actually thought it was reasonably effective, was 13th Warrior, or what?
Oh, the one with Antonio Banderas.
Yeah. Antonio Banderas is
the Michael Crichton, the one based on the Michael Crichton book, Eaters of the Dead. Yeah. Where he's the poet in the court of Baghdad, and he goes and he meets this Norseman, right? And he doesn't understand anything they're saying, but he quietly watches them and sees what words are repeated around the campfire, and then he learns their language. And actually, I think that's done pretty well in a montage of him being an intelligent person who knows words.
Yeah, because that becomes part of the drama. That is what it's about on the face of it. And now we're drawn into that challenge. That becomes the conflict of the scene, is how do we achieve communication? So that's really interesting. I've not seen that movie, but
probably like it. You'd like it, Richard. Yeah. It's a fun little Michael Crichton. Everything Michael Crichton was getting adapted in the 90s, so we're going to start adapting things that maybe didn't need to be adapted into a film movie. It's fine. Antonio Banderas is playing, I believe, a Middle Easterner because he can
he's a poet.
He can get away with anything, that guy.
The Caliph in Baghdad. So he's a very sophisticated guy from a sophisticated civilization. By the way, in that film, and we can leave it on this point, it's interesting, they make the same mistake that this film makes, is the Norse culture is portrayed as primitive in the sense of having no writing whatsoever. In fact, there's a scene there where one of the Norse king says, hey, show me how you draw. I think he says, draw words. What do you mean? Oh, writing. Okay. But they did have runes, and they also had like 700, 800 years of contact with the bordering civilization. So it's unlikely that somebody would have not known what writing is. I'm sorry, I have to get that historical little footnote in there. But anyway, thank you, gentlemen. I've learned a lot. You both get an A+ on the exam. That's right. So you will be able to graduate and pay off your loans. So I'm very...
Wait a second.
It's all coming back.
We have to pay these back. We have to pay these back.
God, thank God. Oh, thank you, Professor.
So on that note, Richard, where can people find you and the things that you work on when you're not here with me talking about movies taking place in the Alps?
They can find me on my podcast, Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf. Come for the book, stay for the oversharing. You can hear it anywhere you listen to podcasts. Check it out.
And as for me, you can find me anywhere you listen to podcasts as well. Primarily podcasting over on iTunes and Spotify would be helpful. Like, rate, and review the Kulturecast over there. And on Patreon, patreon.com/Kulturecast, where you can kick a couple dollars my way to hear Richard and Mike and I talk about James Bond once a month, if that's a thing you're into. If not, you don't have to do anything. So just listen to this for free. I mean, I'm not going to stop providing this for free. Richard, thank you so much for joining me. Dr. Perlmutter, thank you so much for picking the movie. And, I guess I would say unga bunga, but that's probably less what they were saying. So
that's a very offensive term.
Yeah, the caveman. No. Oh, I just lost my Geico caveman audience really quickly. So, come on back for the next episode of the Kulturecast.